My name's Brandon and this is Cartoon Network Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Cartoon Network shows and retrospectively review them. We finally did it. We've arrived at Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion, the most ambitious crossover event in history. Eat your heart out, Avengers. The requests for me to review this game have rolled in consistently since I started the channel, despite the fact that I'm clearly going through all of the games in chronological order. It's by far my most anticipated review since Cartoon Network Racing, and when you look at it, it's easy to see why. Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion was released on June 2, 2011, and it initially was exclusive to the Nintendo 3DS. At this point in time, there was absolutely nothing to play on the 3DS, so this was actually a massive release for me to look forward to as someone who got a 3DS at launch. However, for some bizarre reason, the 3DS version was delayed for almost an entire year for countries outside of North America. This wait was agonizing for me, not only because I was desperate for something to play on the 3DS, but also because, as a Cartoon Network fan, this game was a literal dream come true. During this agonizing wait, it was announced that an upgraded version for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and Nintendo Wii would be released on November 15. That version wouldn't hit other regions until early 2012. Does this release cycle feel familiar? It's quite literally the exact same release that Super Smash Bros. Took for the 3DS and Wii U versions. I'm not saying Sakurai copied Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion, but the facts are there. The worst part about this delayed release in Australia was, by the time it finally came out, I'd eventually lost my hype for it and I didn't even buy any of the versions. Both versions of the game were developed by Papaya Studio. If you keep up with my videos, you'll remember that they developed Vilgax Attacks and Cosmic Destruction recently. I was very positive in my review of Cosmic Destruction, so having Papaya back fills me with a bit of confidence. As for the publisher, Crave Games returns to publishing Cartoon Network games for the first time in a very long time. In the early days of this channel, they popped up a bit for things like Camp Lazlo and Foster's Home. In the UK and beyond, the publishing was handled by Deep Silver. The 3DS version fared poorly with critics. It sits at a 58 on Metacritic with only 2 positive reviews. Nintendo World Report gave the game a 7.5 out of 10, Nintendo Power a 7 out of 10, Nintendo Life a 6 out of 10, GameSpot a 5.5 out of 10, 4.8 out of 10 from Game Informer, and a 4.5 out of 10 from IGN. A lot of big names reviewed this game, but it doesn't seem like a lot of them enjoyed it. Bizarrely, a listing for the home console version of the game doesn't even exist on Metacritic. In a case like this, I would usually defer to Game Rankings, but that site was killed off recently, so that's a no-go. Of the reviews I could track down, I found that GamesRadar gave it a 2.5 out of 5, IGN gave it a 5 out of 10, and GameSpot gave it a 5.5. This seems like signs for concern, but I'm trying to stay positive here. A Cartoon Network crossover fighter in the style of Super Smash Bros. Is literally a dream come true. God, I hope this doesn't disappoint. I think it goes without saying that the XL version of Punch Time Explosion is the definitive version. While the two versions seem pretty similar in a lot of ways, XL adds in a lot more content. 8 new playable characters have been introduced here, bringing the game's roster to 16. Of these 16 fighters, 11 different Cartoon Network franchises are represented, which is a healthy amount, I'd say. In fact, I'd say this is by far the best coverage of Cartoon Network's history in any of their crossover titles so far. It pays homage to classic series like Dexter's Lab and the Powerpuff Girls, shows love to shows from the era that followed like Grim Adventures and Foster's Home, and then includes some more recent shows at the time like Chowder and Flapjack. The most glaring omissions from the roster are Ed, Edd and Eddy and Courage the Cowardly Dog. It's genuinely baffling that these two shows didn't have any representation when you consider how popular they were. I think the roster is solid, but I would have loved if they went all in on being a crossover. Personally, I believe they should have represented every notable Cartoon Network show. Even stuff like Camp Lazlo and My Gym Partner's a Monkey should have been featured. At this point in time, Super Smash Bros. Brawl had 37 characters and had released 3 years earlier, so to have less than half the characters available despite some franchises not being represented kinda sucks. I don't want to sound too negative about the roster though, because for the most part I'm completely happy with it. Fuck Smash Bros, y'all need to tell me who your main in Punch Time Explosion. Other upgrades from the 3DS version include 7 new assist characters, 5 new stages, and some new gameplay modes. There's also an in-game shop where you can unlock many of those things too. Going off all of that, I can sort of understand why the 3DS version got low scores. It does seem like it was a little bit light on content. With all of the differences between versions out of the way, let's have a look at the actual gameplay, shall we? Anybody who has ever picked up a Super Smash Bros. Game is probably going to feel right at home here. It's very clearly inspired by Smash, but unlike many of the reviewers, I'm not going to knock it for being similar. People shit all over PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale for not just straight up copying Smash, yet this game got shit on for being too similar. There's just no way to please everyone. It's a cliched line, but Punch Time Explosion's gameplay is in line with the classic, easy to pick up, hard to master style. X is used to jump, square is your basic attacks and can be held for a charged attack, circle is a grab, and triangle is your special attacks. You can also dodge and block attacks by using L1 in conjunction with the analog stick. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it doesn't have to. Why change everything up just for the sake of it? People are going to compare this game to Smash regardless, so might as well copy what it does well. Smash introduced the final Smash system in Brawl, and no surprise, this game has its own version. Punch Time Explosions are the name of the super moves here. Despite seeming similar on the surface, they actually share more in common with PlayStation All-Stars super moves. In All-Stars, you gain super moves by inflicting damage on your opponents. It's the exact same here, except instead of having different tiers of super moves for each character, you just have the one. All of the Punch Time Explosions were cool to see, and they pretty much all felt unique. My biggest gripe would be the animations that play before using them. These are cool the first time, but soon become annoying and tedious to watch. The game is also complete with recovery moves and all that jazz too. It uses a percentage-based health system, although from what I found it seemed like you could take a lot more damage before being in trouble in this game. In Smash, you're usually at risk of being blown off the stage at around 100% health, whereas here 200% seemed to be the sweet spot for that. The change doesn't make a big difference, and I have no doubts it was implemented to try and make the game a little more friendly to their younger target audience. Look, Super Smash Bros has far better combat, that goes without saying. The combat in Punch Time Explosion is nowhere near as satisfying, but that doesn't automatically make it bad. In fact, this game is actually pretty damn satisfying to play. Movement is surprisingly fluid, and it felt like Papaya Studio had designed the gameplay around being fast. None of the characters feel slow. It's like each character is a different shade of fast. Some people might not like that choice, but as someone who prefers the pace of their fighters to be fast and frenetic, I loved it. It was honestly rare that I came across a character that I disliked using. Sure, I had my favourites like any of the Powerpuff Girls, Grim, Aku, and Mojo Jojo, but I could play most matches by randomly selecting a character and still have a ton of fun. I've played quite a lot of games that copy the Smash Bros style over the years, and this is honestly one of the best examples. Levels might infuriate Smash purists who only play on Final Destination, but I found almost all of the game's levels to be really enjoyable. The majority of them are extremely well designed and thoughtful, and Papaya Studio certainly didn't choose the laziest route to go down for these. So many Smash clones design static levels based on whatever franchise they're covering, ignoring the fact that most Smash levels are far from static. Punch Time Explosion includes classic staples like scrolling levels and levels that transform midway through. Some of the levels that transform changed drastically, to the point where it was giving me PlayStation All-Star vibes. Levels are also littered with items and assist characters. Most of the items are pretty stock standard, and the assist characters aren't too crazy either. However, there is one unique hook here. Every character is capable of a synergy attack if they unleash their compatible assist character. For example, if Chowder gets Madame Foster as an assist character, they'll pull off a much stronger attack than usual. The animations for this are a bit of fun, and it's nice seeing these characters from different shows combine here. While the Smash purists may dislike that, there are plenty of other things they'll love. Firstly, the standard fight rules for this game is 3 stock, no time limit fights. That alone shows me that Papaya Studio was in touch with the Smash community. Don't like those rules or simply want to change it up a little? No problem. There's the ability to alter basically all of the rules for your fights so that you can play the game whichever way you like. Alongside these regular battles, there are also 2 unique modes, PTE mode and drone mode. PTE mode has you conducting a regular fight, but the main goal is to collect as many cubes as you can during the fight. I thought this was a fun little change up, but the fact that they imposed a hard 1 minute time limit sucks. 1 minute is way too short, and as far as I could tell, there was no way to alter it. I didn't mess around with the custom match settings too much though, so perhaps there was a way to set up this kind of match through there. Similarly, drone mode is all about seeing who can defeat as many of the story mode enemies in a fight. Unfortunately, the same time limit applies, and it's just as annoying here. Lastly, we have an arcade mode. This is the same kind of arcade mode you'd see in pretty much any fighting game, including Smash. As you'd expect, you pick any character and then fight your way through a bunch of standard fights. What I liked about this arcade mode was that it changed things up a little. It wasn't all 1v1 fights, with a mixture of tag and handicap matches included to keep things fresh and also provide a little more challenge. The next difference might be a little controversial, but it's one that I loved. All matches in arcade mode are one-stock matches. If you die, you lose. While some people might hate this, I loved it. It keeps the pace of the mode lightning quick, and if you die, you can simply restart that specific fight. Too often I feel like arcade modes get bogged down and become a slog to go through, which is definitely not the case here. Unfortunately, I did have some gripes with it. In general, arcade mode doesn't serve much of a purpose. They're just standard fights, and because of their format, they aren't even a great way to farm points to unlock new characters or stages. Even worse is that the final fight of arcade mode is always the same as far as I can tell. I started it 3 different times with 3 different characters, and every single time him was the final fight. All of the other fights were randomized, but the finale always stayed the same. This is the one fight I would want to be changed up. Give me a final boss that ties into whatever character I picked. Because of this, it's hard to recommend ever playing arcade mode more than once, and considering how quickly you can beat it, it sort of becomes an afterthought. There's also a training mode in Punch Time Explosion, so if you're a scrub that needs to get good, this is the place for you. With all of that said, it's time to talk about the game's story mode, which is really the headline act here. Before you even jump into the story, you'll find that you can actually play the story mode in co-op. This is a really cool addition. It's not something I took advantage of here, but I would have loved this back in the day. Once you do start the mode, you'll only have access to Ben Tennyson, but as you progress on your journey, you'll be drip-fed new characters. I really loved the way they did this, and I think it's the perfect way to start the game. Going into this game blind, it felt nice to have characters handed to me at a pace where I was able to try each one out and really discover which ones I liked and which ones I didn't. The story mode is also clearly inspired by Brawl's Subspace Emissary mode. Obviously, the game's narrative was always going to be about the characters teaming up to fight some overall big bad, but apart from that, it's pretty similar in almost every way. All of the new characters you encounter have been possessed by some sort of darkness, which is exactly the same as in Subspace Emissary. The gameplay mostly happens through side-scrolling sections where you fight enemies specific to the story, with traditional fights interspersed. Hell, even some of the enemies here felt inspired by enemies from Brawl. It's pretty close to a copy-paste job, but that doesn't annoy me too much. The format works well enough, and crossover games like this always tend to have a similar premise. Where the story mode does fall flat is in the actual story. The narrative is fine for the most part, but the cutscenes are a major letdown. I would describe the cutscenes as lightly animated, and they're certainly of a much lower quality than the animation of any of the shows represented here. It's a real shame because I think they did a good job finding a 2D art style that actually works well with all the different show styles in the game. There's also no voice acting from the characters themselves. Instead, the whole game is narrated by George Lowe, the voice of Space Ghost.
There's only one universe left. I wonder what it is. Whoa, check out the dress on this guy.
The narrator is basically written as if he's Space Ghost, and he even references Moltar at the end of the story. However, he's just credited as announcer. The decision to have the entire game be narrated is a huge kick in the guts, and really hurts the story mode. The actual appeal of Subspace Emissary was the epic story, and while that wasn't filled with voice acting, it was filled with high quality and epic cutscenes. Here we get average animation that doesn't do any of the moments justice, and we don't even get to hear the characters actually interacting with one another. I think Papaya Studio completely misunderstood what people loved about Brawl's story mode. The gameplay was whatever, but the epic moments in between the gameplay made it enjoyable. Punch Time Explosion doesn't have that, so it's left with a story mode that's just okay. As if it didn't copy Subspace Emissary enough, the story mode contains clunky minecart sections which play out awfully. It does include quite a lot of other minigame sort of moments, which work a hell of a lot better. There were a couple of sections, like the level where you have to defend cheese and a specific platforming section in a Samurai Jack level, that I loathed. Arguably the biggest misstep in the story mode is that it spoils the big twist at the end. The finale of the game sees you taking on an evil remote control in what is a moment very reminiscent of Master Hand. When all of the Cartoon Network characters have their backs against the wall, Captain Planet appears to save the day. This is played off like a big reveal, but his big ass blue head has just been sitting on the character select screen for the last 3 hours, so it isn't a surprise at all. It's cool that they paid a homage to such a deep cut as Captain Planet, but it sucks that they spoil this. Having George Lowe as the narrator also just made me wish Space Ghost was the reveal instead. He's a superhero, so it would work in exactly the same way as Captain Planet, but it would also serve as a way to pay homage to Adult Swim, which has been a huge part of Cartoon Network's history. Overall, my experience with the story mode was okay. It's nothing to write home about, but it's not exactly a slog to play through. It's only about 3 hours long, so you'll be done with it fairly quickly. Considering single player modes generally aren't the appeal of a party fighting game, I'd say the story mode is passable. And if nothing else, it's a great way to earn points to unlock all the characters. By the end of the story, I had purchased every character in the game. Finally, I need to address the visuals. The game isn't anything to write home about. It certainly doesn't look anything close to as good as PlayStation All-Stars or Brawl. Where it does stand out and deserves to be applauded is for making all of these character designs work in harmony. You take something like Samurai Jack and compare it to Ben 10 and Flapjack, and you'll just see how much the styles clash. Somehow, Papaya Studio has made them all work rather well in a 3D space. I didn't have any moments where I recoiled in horror, which is a real positive. The only exception might have been Captain Planet, who looked a little bit strange in 3D to me.
In a different world, in a different dimension, there's about to be a serious showdown. Prepare yourself for Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion. 18 of your favorite Cartoon Network characters. Rumbling, shooting, punching. Battle your friends with 4-player wireless. Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion. Serious fighting, seriously funny.
It's such a relief to say Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion is a good game. Genuinely good, by the way. Not just good for a Cartoon Network game or good for a knockoff Smash Bros clone, it's genuinely good. The core gameplay is incredibly fun, even ignoring all of the Cartoon Network theming around it. However, when you do take into account that this game is a love letter to all things Cartoon Network, it goes up another level. I criticised it for excluding some franchises, but for the most part this pays great respect to the history of the channel. As somebody who well and truly grew up as a Cartoon Network kid, it warms my heart to see this. Cartoon Network Speedway and Block Party were disasters. Cartoon Network Racing was a major step up, but Punch Time Explosion is better than I could have ever hoped, to be perfectly honest. I'm seriously confused why it was panned by critics. Most of the reviews are for the 3DS version, but the reviews for the home console version are overwhelmingly negative. Now, I'm not advocating for it to be on the main stage at EVO.
Reset
How much
here.
is gonna spend?
No, he just takes the damage. Mago's in trouble, keeps it bluffed. Dalvin is your EVO Japan 2020 champion with Sakura over Mago.
And almost.
But I'll be damned if I accept people calling this game trash. Personally, I think a lot of people are way too biased and nostalgic to accept Smash Bros clones for what they are. People had the same general reaction to PlayStation All-Stars 2, which was a perfectly fine game. People will criticise the Smash clone for being too similar, but as soon as it strays from the formula, they'll criticise it for being too different. Some of the complaints from critics are absolutely wild too. Take IGN's review for example. It complains that you have to unlock characters by either playing the story mode or by playing lots of matches. You know, the exact same way it works in Smash. If you're mad that it takes 3 whole hours to unlock every character, you shouldn't be reviewing video games. GameSpot complains about the exact same thing too. It honestly comes across as if they were mad that they were forced to review this game and wanted it over and done with as quickly as possible. Games Radar goes a different route, instead complaining that your favourite character probably isn't here. What? Apart from Ed, Edd and Eddy and Courage, all of the major shows are represented. Nobody is crying because Juniper Lee and the cast of Class of 3000 aren't here. Would Mike, Lou and Og have really made this game any better for you? Would it have been nice to have Adult Swim represented as well as reps from basically every Cartoon Network show ever made? Sure. But it's not this massive game-changing issue when you have all the major favourites here. At the end of the day, this is a fun game. You have to be a little bit joyless or completely hate Cartoon Network to not get enjoyment from Punch Time Explosion. Anyway, if anybody needs me, they can come find me on Punch Time Explosion. 1v1 me, number 1 only, training stage, no items.